Batman and Superman fight God, and the ending of this story is amazing. So, what this does is this picks up with Superman in the Fortress of Solitude, who's just kind of petting his pets, right? You know, he's like, yes, who's a good Gronk? You're a good Gronk. And he's like, rah! And he gets pulled through a portal. Now, at the same time that goes on, things start going sideways in like the Batcave, which is to say, a giant hand comes out of the giant penny and the Tyrannosaurus Rex just starts running around of its own recognizance, attacking everybody. But then Abraham Lincoln springs to life because Abraham Lincoln is gonna save everybody. And while all this madness is going on and Robin has no idea what's happening, the response of Batman? Call Superman, because immediately he knows what's going on. But then Superman arrives after being yanked through the portal, and with a few more shenanigans basically unfolding here, that they realize pretty quickly what's going on. And they call out Batmite and Mxyzptlk. But here's the thing, their response here is, okay, look, like, this was not us. Like, we swear, we were not the ones causing all of this. Instead, somebody's killing our friends, which is when you get this revelation that in DC Comics, a lot of you guys know of Batmite and Mxyzptlk, right? The fifth dimensional imps of just astronomical power. They can basically alter reality on a whim, right? There's crazy all the kind of stuff that they can do. Well, they're not the only ones like that in the fifth dimension. There's an imp for Wonder Woman and for Green Arrow and for Green Lantern and all these different guys. And somebody's been killing them off. So these guys showing up here seems to be for the purpose of recruiting Batman and Superman. Now, here's where they give a kind of revelation about what's happening here. Because what Mxyzptlk says is effectively, something's coming, right? And he says, we're under siege. Myself and Batmite's peeps. I tried to warn them, but no dice. All they wanted to do was keep play acting like their favorite heroes. Hawkmite, Flashmite, Metamorphomite, which is kind of crazy, because reasons. But then when Greenmite was offed by some oncoming forces, they started listening, but it was too late. And Mxyzptlk and I were the only ones that got away. And so in effect, in a dimension of fifth dimensional imps, each one of which is almost as powerful as God, someone's killing them, which means someone's got to be more powerful than they are. And what's going on here is a lot bigger than you think, because again, this ending is nuts. Right? And so what ends up happening here is they basically split off into groups. But instead of Batmite going with Batman and Mxyzptlk going with Superman, which is normally exactly how that works, Mxyzptlk goes with Batman and Batmite goes with Superman, which is kind of a cool switch. Now, there does come a point where Mxyzptlk just starts mouthing off, right, where Batman's like, look, here's the thing, man. I know you're used to appearing in Metropolis and wreaking havoc on Superman, causing all kinds of chaos and turning his world upside down, all that kind of stuff, but that's not happening here, right? No joking, no pranking. You act only on my orders. And where Mxyzptlk is just kind of like, I mean, look, man, who do you think you're talking to, right? I mean, you think I won't turn your car into a giant banana? Batman gives him the stare. And you guys know the stare I'm talking about, that 1,000-yard stare, right? Where he just like looks at you and then just kind of closes his eyes a little bit. That Batman stare, which is enough to shut anybody up. So Mxyzptlk is just like, okay, cool, look, man, I'm not gonna do anything to you. Which I think it's kind of funny that just Batman looking at him is enough to freak him out. But then you switch over to Coast City, right, the home of Metropolis. You have Sinestro, the leader of the Yellow Lantern Corps, with a Sinestro imp. And can we all just agree here that Sinestro imp, right, Sinestro Mite, if you want to call him that, basically looks like Waluigi? I mean, come on, like, it's clearly he's based off that guy, but like, they're absolutely demolishing the Green Lantern. Batman and Mxyzptlk show up just long enough to basically help Green Lantern, but that's really the extent of what's going on here. The villain imps from the fifth dimension are teaming up with the villains in the main DC universe, amplifying their powers, giving them new abilities, and the whole thing's done for a particular test, right? But there's this moment where Mxyzptlk is like, okay, so like, who wants powers? And Batman's like, don't be ridiculous. Robin is like you and me, where he's like, I do, I want powers. I'll take powers. And so he just kind of becomes like the Robin version of Superman. I don't know how I feel about the costume, but the whole idea looks pretty dope. And so this guy quite literally just crushes Sinestro pretty handedly, to to be honest with you guys. But while that's going on, you got Superman and Batmite who show up in Central City, where the Flash normally operates out of. And you've got a villain called Kadabra, who's actually a dude from the future who uses science to trick people into thinking that he's doing magic when he's just kind of manipulating them behind the scenes and so on and so forth. But essentially, he now actually has magical abilities because of the imp from the 5th dimension. And so what ends up going on is he uses all of his magic against Superman, who's traditionally weak to this kind of stuff. So what you end up getting here is a kind of back and forth between these two groups, which is really just designed to showcase the chaotic nature of everything that's going on here, where you have Batman and Mxyzptlk who are working alongside Robin to crush Sinestro, but then you also get this statement where Mxyzptlk says, the reason why all the villains are doing this is because there is a guy who showed up in our dimension seemingly out of nowhere, and who wanted to see who the best and most powerful superhero is in your 3rd dimension. So that's why this is happening, because whoever it is that comes out on top, i.e. whoever survives this whole experience, will basically be the one to challenge this guy. Something else that needs to be pointed out here, there's a Joker imp, a Joker mite, and that's dope. Like, I think that's probably one of the coolest things that I've ever seen in DC Comics, and I hate to imagine the chaos that this guy would unleash. But then you get this kind of interesting moment where you have like Batmite, who's sort of disheartened. Because for those of you guys who don't know, Batmite is Batman's version of Mxyzptlk from the Superman comics. But Batmite is more obsessed with Superman, and he's always trying to lend a hand, albeit usually getting in the way, whereas Mxyzptlk just loves giving Superman a hard time, right? That's just making his life rough is really all it is. But one of the things that happens is Superman tries to cheer up Batmite a little bit because he's disappointed because Batman's not there, right? Like his favorite superhero isn't there, and he's just kind of sad, which is adorable at the same time, and I kind of love it. But Superman tries to cheer him up by asking him, can you make me like some armor that can shield me from magic? Of course, all Batmite has to do is snap his fingers and it basically becomes an absolute thing. But the armor was designed for Batman. So Superman gets this Batman armor that actually looks really dope, if we're being honest. Like, I really dig this, and I kind of want it to stick around. But it's just enough to kind of shield Superman from the effects of all these magical powers of Kadabra. And then, of course, he ends up defeating the guy around the same time that Robin defeats Sinestro. But then Robin starts tapping into his powers, which are basically Superman's powers. And what he ends up doing, at least the first thing he does, is he uses telescopic vision. And that's when the powers start to overwhelm him, because he can't really process being able to see everything everywhere all at once. It just kind of overwhelms his brain. Then the super hearing starts to kick in, right? Just kind of the traditional onset of Superman's powers. And even Mxyzptlk tries to warn him. He's like, look, man, you can't just go using telescopic vision like that. Like, it took Superman years to get used to using his powers in that way. You can't just suddenly start using them because you really want them, right? I mean, it's going to take you some work. So ultimately, Robin agrees to give the powers up because it's simply more than his body can handle. But while that goes on, Superman chimes in and has a kind of conversation with Batmite. And I feel like this is important, if for no other reason than the fact that it kind of builds up and will likely change the way in which we see Batmite in the future of DC Comics. But Superman basically tells him, look, like, I get you're a fan of Batman, you love to see him in action, but the reality here is he's not like me, right? Like, most of my villains are rational, most of my villains really just kind of want money, but they're nowhere near as dark and crazy as all the villains in Gotham City. Whenever Batman goes out as a superhero and does a thing, lives are on the line, including his own, and he treats it that way. So you have to treat it that way, because if you don't and you become a distraction, Batman's going to hate you. So do not be a distraction, be an asset, be someone that Batman can rely on to get the job done. But all this comes to a head, all the hopes and dreams of coming out on top, all come to a head when they all travel to Metropolis and Parasite pops up. Now, historically speaking, in DC Comics, Parasite is a villain that feeds on a combination of the life energy and even the powers of other people who are out there. It's one of the things that makes him such a dangerous foe when it's someone like Superman. But with his abilities being amped up by his Parasite imp, if we want to call it that, right? Parasite might, I don't know how you roll that off the tongue very easily, that Parasite now has the ability to not only take people's life energies, their powers, but he also has the ability to break down the atomic bonds of matter. In essence, and as crazy as what I'm about to tell you is going to sound, what he ends up doing is taking away Batman and Superman and Robin's three-dimensionality. He reduces them to 2 dimensions. Literally, they're pictures on a wall. It's nuts, man. I told you guys, dude, it's gonna go off the rails. Like, it's it's a phenomenal story, but it gets insane so incredibly fast. And so what you end up getting is this almost kind of a fast track, this kind of montage of various conflicts that are taking place out there from various people, right? You've got Aquaman facing off against Black Manta and Black Manta Might. You've got Wonder Woman facing off against Cheetah, and then you got Cheetah Might, which I don't even know what Cheetah Might's gonna do for Cheetah. Well, make her claws longer. But the thing is that ultimately you have Mxyzptlk, who looks at Jimmy Olsen, because what he realizes is that as having been a part of Superman's mythos for so incredibly long, Mxyzptlk's done all kinds of crazy stuff to Jimmy Olsen over the years. He's turned him into all kinds of crazy things, if for no other reason than to mess with Superman, or because Jimmy Olsen was just kind of caught in the crossfire between Mxyzptlk and Superman himself. But what he says is like, I need an army of superheroes, right? An army of people that have powers. Everybody out here is getting defeated, but someone that none of my imps are familiar with, at least none of my race know anything about. That's what I need. Right? I don't need the Justice League because there is a might for each one of the Justice League members. They're going to be able to overpower them. But then he looks at Jimmy and he's like, I've done some crazy stuff to you over the years, right? And Jimmy's like, I mean, yeah, and I'd kind of like to forget it. But the response of Batmite is, but it's all in your subconscious. So he starts pulling all of them out, all these weird modifications and adjustments that he's made to Jimmy over the years, they all start popping up. And that's why you see these crazy depictions of Jimmy Olsen, where he's like a werewolf, he's a Lastalad, he's got like 6 arms, just all kinds of nut stuff. And it's also things that like DC's done when they shifted his character up, right? When they gave him abilities in some random story or something along those lines. But for Batman and Superman, once they're stuck in this 2-dimensional space, they kind of start talking to Batmite, right? Because what ended up happening is that in an effort to get them pulled out of there, Batmite was able to pull Robin off the wall, but was yanked into the wall in place of Robin. So now he's here and he's talking to these guys and he's like, so we're only 2 dimensions. Like, that's kind of weird. He sees some lizards that are spray painted on the wall. And he's like, that's kind of cool, right? But at the end of the day, it's all kind of hyper focusing on what's going on. And so what happens is he realizes, okay, I can break dimensional barriers, but breaking through dimensional barriers is not some easy thing to do. You don't just snap your fingers and jump in and out. Otherwise, he could have saved them instantly. Instead, he kind of has to pull them from one location to another, but it's more walking through a tunnel blind. And what I mean by that is when he pulls them out, they end up traveling to the 6th dimension, where every moment in time exists simultaneously. So there is no such thing here as this happened 20 years ago. What we would define as 20 years ago is happening right now. What we would define as 20 years from now is happening right now. It's crazy. Basically, it's how like Dr. Manhattan sees time in The Watchmen, but it's kind of nuts, right? It's just crazy, weird, and wonky depiction. But ultimately they all agree, right? Like they have to get back. But one of the things they do realize, and one of the things that Batmite tells them, is the guy who's hunting all these different mites and the guy who's basically invading their world for the purpose of trying to find who the strongest superhero is originates from this dimension. And one of the things that DC has established over the years is the higher the dimensional number, the more powerful the person is. So the 3-dimensional space is you and me and DC Comics, their universe, and that, you know, that whole thing. The 4th dimension is stronger than the 3rd dimension. The 5th dimension is stronger than the 4th, the 6th, the 5th, so on and so forth. And so this guy has an incredible amount of power, but they also realize that he left his dimension in order to try to overpower the 5th dimension because of the one thing that he cannot be in his own dimension: the best there is at whatever it is that he's doing, right? He's just another guy there. And so it's not that dissimilar from like Booster Gold, right? For those of you guys who are familiar with his character, traveling from the future to the present day in order to trick people into thinking that he's greater than he is. And so while you have the whole thing with Jimmy Olsen going on, which it needs to be pointed out here, this guy's doing a pretty solid job, man. Like, he really, really is. He's doing an amazing job against all these different forces, that because he's defeated all the villains, that this 6th-dimensional guy shows up and is like, the tests are complete. Jimmy Olsen, you are officially Earth's mightiest hero. And Jimmy's like, yeah, cool, man. And the dude's like, prepare to die. And he's like, what? It's kind of hilarious, right? Now, initially, all these superheroes that are here unite against like this sixth-dimensional guy, but he snaps his fingers and they're all whisked away because in his mind, the fight is between himself and Jimmy Olsen. But at the moment, Jimmy's just a dude, right? Like the adjustments that were made by Mxyzptlk were short-term. They were not designed to be long-term, and it wasn't designed to be some massive expansion to his abilities. And so what ends up happening is Mxyzptlk actually gives Jimmy Olsen his powers and switches places with him. So Mxyzptlk is just an old dude, and Jimmy Olsen is now this incredibly godly, powerful character, but he's not as powerful as this sixth-dimensional guy. And so literally he just kind of starts toying with Jimmy, right? Just flicking him with his finger, that kind of thing. And then he goes to punch him and seemingly destroys him, right? Like kills Jimmy on the spot. And it's not to say that Jimmy didn't try. I mean, he tried his best, right? Like he basically turned himself into Superman and just got punched into the ground. There just was no saving that guy. Poor Jimmy. Jimmy can't catch a break, man. Like this poor guy. But jumping back to Superman, Batman, and Batmite, that Batmite kind of gets carried away in the moment and actually doesn't want to leave, in the sense that because all time converges in this dimension, he's coming across an infinite number of Batman from an infinite number of possible timelines, where Batman's like a Western guy, Batman's this, Batman's that. It's like a buffet for the Batman fan. Like he just doesn't want to go anywhere. But that's when Superman tells him, remember, be an asset, do not be a hindrance. What does Batman need in the here and now? He needs the same thing I do. He needs to get out of here and go back home. So like, be the one we need. Don't be the one we don't need. And so what it does is it leads to Batmite ripping through the fifth dimension, the fourth dimension, and then back down to the third dimension, and then to the second dimension, and then to the first dimension. Where they missed the ride home. So now they're stuck down in this first dimensional space because Batmite is never ever doing anything except screwing things up. And poor Superman, he's just kind of like, bruh. Right? So like Batman sits down, he starts talking to Batmite, and he actually offers these really, really cool words of encouragement. Because in years past, Batman would have just yelled at Batmite, right? Like, what's your problem, man? And would have just chastised him. But instead, with these words of encouragement, where Batmite says like, you're my hero, the response of Batman is no, right? I'm not an idol. I'm not some smiling superhero. I'm just a man trying his level best every night to prevent trauma and protect the helpless. It's not a colorful job anymore. It's not silly and it's not funny, but it means everything to me. That's why whenever I see people who dive into a pool and the sign says no diving, I pummel them and I make it so they're gonna drink their food through a straw for the next 3 years because they broke the rules. And so because of that, he doesn't actually do that. I saw that in a TikTok video. I thought it was hilarious. But because of that, Batmite kind of has this renewed encouragement. And so he shows back up, right? Grabs Superman, Batman, and they show back up here in the third dimension just in time to try to help everybody and really like face off against this entire sixth dimensional guy and all the powers he possesses. While that happens, you end up finding out that Jimmy Olsen actually survived because he realized after all his time with Superman and facing off against Mxyzptlk, the only way to send Mixie back to his home dimension is to get him to say his name backwards. So Jimmy did exactly that. He said his name backwards. That sent him directly back to the fifth dimension, and he rallied all these other mites that were there that were basically in hiding, right? Reminding them of the importance of working as a team and what it meant to be a superhero. So grabbing all these guys and bringing them all together, again, they converge with Batman and Superman arriving on the scene. And Batman, ever the intelligent guy, right? Like Superman's here and he's like, okay, thank you for helping everybody. Your bravery is commendable. Batman, as usual, has a plan, and now would be a great time to tell it to all of us, Batman. And Batman says, I know exactly how to defeat him. Here's what he needs to do. And then they all get blasted. It's like, wow, right? They all get blown up. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. The final issue, I think, comes out in a month or so. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.